Hey friends, I hope that you all are doing well. Today I want to talk about something that is a little bit difficult for me to talk about, but I feel very guided and spirit led to have this conversation, I guess, like to just put this out there, to talk about this. Um, Today is the anniversary of my mother's veil crossing, if you want to call it that. Several years ago, she passed today at 3:24 p.m. in the afternoon. So I just want to talk about that experience because it is single-handedly probably one of the most, if not the most, one of the most spiritual and impactful moments in my life that ultimately has completely altered, in every sense of the word, who I am now. And it's played a large part in my development spiritually and in the craft. And the story, I will say, it does revolve around death. And if that's not something that you would like to explore or listen to right now, maybe come back and watch this video another time. It is going to be weird to tell the story. I mean, not in a bad way. I've told this story before with people, just never to my camera. So I'm sure this is going to be an exercise of shadow work. And especially if I go back and re-listen to this and edit it, it'll be even more of an exercise of shadow work. But I am prepared to do this work. I am prepared to revisit this. Today being the day that she crossed the veil, because I do like to celebrate her birthday, of course, still, but I also like to celebrate this day. And that sometimes looks different from year to year. I don't know if you guys have seen at all in the backgrounds of my videos, but I do keep an ancestor shrine to her going above the bookcase. And of course, she's with me always in my heart. And I feel like my mother has called me to talk about this. And I guess I feel like it'll be easier to just do it this way in a video format. And so anyway, I guess I don't know where to start with this. So we're just gonna jump right in. So losing my mother at the age that I lost her was, like I said, single-handedly probably one of the most spiritually altering events in my life. When I lost my mother, I was 22 years old. And up until this point, this could probably be a whole other video, but my mother and I have always had a very interesting relationship. I grew up with her. We were extremely close, but we also had a lot of difficulties with, it's that mother-daughter relationship that maybe some of you can relate to. My mother also had her own struggles with mental health and substance abuse issues. And that's something that I've seen firsthand where that can take you if it's not kept in check. My mother was probably one of the most traumatizing experiences that I may ever go through. Losing my mother gave me an entirely different perspective on my life and myself and my family and my morality, my spirituality. In every sense of the word, I transformed through this process. There's lots of trauma and heartache and pain involving this story and how we got here. But for this video, since it is my mother's veil crossing anniversary, I think I would like to just talk about that experience and what that was like And I'm not entirely sure why I feel called to share this story. Maybe there's someone out there going through something similar who can find some sort of solace or comfort in my story, and maybe they can feel less alone, or I'm not sure, but I feel called to share this story. So I was about 22 when this happened, and at this time in my life, I had made a lot of really poor decisions and was in the process, you know, because our lives are kind of like a story, and all of us individually are the main characters of our own story. And at this point in my life, my character, me, in this story, was going through very much a redemption arc of getting my shit together, turning my life around, and making better decisions. Some of the decisions that I had made had impacted certain areas of my life, and that's a different conversation for another time. But yes, we are definitely a redemption arc character, and I've been there multiple times. But anyway, back to the story. I was actually at a friend's house doing some laundry when I got a phone call, and the phone call was from my mom's coworker, and she worked at a hospital. My mom's coworker told me that, you know, I needed to get to the hospital like right away, that it was serious and I needed to come down. And, you know, throughout my childhood, teen years, I grew closer to my mother and her coworkers and her work family, and we had that sort of relationship. So after I got the call, a friend actually took me up and dropped me off at the hospital. I wasn't sure how long I was going to be at the hospital. I wasn't sure what was going on. I was just told to get there as soon as possible, and that they would take me to my mother. So my friend dropped me off, and I walked in to the hospital, and I went down the same corridor and hallway that I had been down numerous times having lunch with my mother, but the air of this corridor felt so different. And I remember distinctly the overhead lights and how different the lights felt that day. My mother's coworker took me to the part of the hospital where my mother was and introduced me to a doctor there who, of course, spoke just with a lot of medical jargon that I didn't necessarily understand. And after that, they took me into the hospital room where my mother was, and she was somewhat coherent. I mean, they had her on some medication and stuff, so she was a little bit loopy, but she was somewhat coherent. Went to the hospital room, and there's a big smile on my mother's face as soon as I walk in, and I sit next to the hospital, or I sit in a chair right next to the hospital bed, and I'm like, Mom, like, what's going on? And she tells me that she's really, really sick. And, you know, this really came out of nowhere. She tells me that the doctors told her that she has a pretty severe viral and bacterial infection, and that they have her on some antibiotics for her bacterial infection. But, you know, there's not a whole lot they can really do for a virus. So what their game plan is to essentially put her into a coma, so that way her body would be able to focus on fighting off this virus that was rapidly taking over her body. And, you know, at that time, I'm rather young, I'm 22, and I don't think I was really understanding the severity of this situation or what could happen, really. My mother was an incredibly strong woman who had very much a past of her own, and had been through so much that in my eyes at that time, I couldn't even imagine her not getting through this as well when she's been through so many other things. But she grabbed my hand at this moment and like told me that it was really serious and that she was worried. And I remember almost like a guard went up within my heart, and I just could not take her words in. And I told my mother, I was like, what do you mean? Like, you're gonna be fine. You know, you're gonna be in here a couple of days and then you're gonna be home. And I wish that is what happened, but it's not. And she told me to shut up and told me that it was really serious and she wasn't sure if she would be able to come back from this. I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, they can kind of put you under, but you have to bring yourself back. And what if I don't come back? And I'm like, Mom, of course you're going to come back. You're going to be fine. Well, then she reminds me that all of her rings and all of her jewelry is in this particular pocket inside of her purse, and asked me if I would put some of her lipstick on her pink Temptress Maybelline lipstick. And I did. And she had me sit back down and she told me, she said, look, no matter what happens, you know I love you endlessly. And she told me to, you know, always be myself, no matter what, to always be true to me, always be myself, and to chase after whatever it is in this life that I want fearlessly. And those were her words, fearlessly. And at that time, I could not take those words in. I'm like, oh my gosh, Mom, like, stop talking like this. You're starting to scare me. You're going to be just fine. And she told me that she didn't think that she would be. And shortly after that, the doctors had to come in and give her some more medication and start the process of putting her under. And I was the last person to see her before she went under. So after that, it is really quite hazy on the timeline, but it's roughly a 3-week period of my mother improving and worsening and getting better, and then kind of relapsing a little bit, and her vitals kind of going up and down. I remember being at the hospital almost every single day that my mother was there. You know, my dad was there, my brothers, sisters, our friends, family, people who were her friends or coworkers coming and checking on her. I mean, different people, all different times of day. My mother was a very beloved woman in our community. And it was very humbling seeing all these people who my mother had touched their lives in ways that I had no idea and couldn't fathom. I think sometimes it's hard when you're a child looking at your parents to see them as a whole complete person and not just your parent. So that was a really interesting experience. So during this period of these weeks, like I said, she would improve and then she would get worse, and then she would improve and then she would get worse. And ultimately she ended up really taking a really quick downward spike. Actually, let me backtrack a little bit. She got really good for a little bit. Really good. And it was looking like she might really turn around. The bacterial infection was mostly gone and the virus seemed to have subsided a little bit. Doctors did warn us that in cases like this, they tend to roller coaster and then even out, for better or for worse. And not even the doctors were completely sure on how to handle some of her care. And I remember one night I had left the hospital with my sister, and she was telling me how she's not even that really into the craft per se, but she intuitively felt that Mom was going to be fine and that she was going to pull out of it. And I remember when my sister was saying those words, it was like I was revisiting in my mind the conversation I had with my mother before she was put under. And I remember my mother expressing her fear and her concern of if she doesn't pull out of it. And something in me felt like, no, she isn't going to pull out of this. But I wasn't really sure if that would really be beneficial to even vocalize to my sister at that time. So we all did our space to just hold space for each other, even though I'm not sure if any of us really completely knew how to do that. My mother was absolutely the glue that kept us all and bound us all together. So without her, Akasha, our family was in a huge period of dismemberment and chaos and upheaval, and the whole dynamic was shifting. But we all did the best that we could to be there for each other. I also remember a couple nights later, before we found out that she was getting really bad, I remember laying in bed late at night during the witching hour. And when I was a little girl, when I would get scared, and I was with my mom, when I would get afraid or scared or something would spook me, I would reach out and grab my mom's thumb. Her left hand, her thumb had a rough, textured birthmark about the size of a quarter on her thumb. And as a little girl, when I would be scared, I would take her thumb and I would rub her thumb, and it would help ground me and bring me back into space and comfort me. And I have a lot of memories of being scared in the middle of the night and crawling into my mom's bed and grabbing her thumb, or us being out in public and me getting spooked by something, because I was kind of actually a very scaredy cat child, even though I'm kind of the opposite now as an adult. And I remember laying in bed and I woke up in the middle of the night holding my own thumb. And I can't really put into words or explain the experience that I felt and the inner knowing that I just knew. But I felt like at that time my mother's spirit was trying to give me some sense of comfort. And my mom had a quote that she would often say, and I can hear her still saying it in my head, that, even if everything is not okay, it's going to be okay. Even if everything is not okay, it's going to be okay. We're going to make it okay. And I felt those words vibrate through my spirit. And I just knew that I needed to try my best to mentally, emotionally, and spiritually prepare for things to not be okay. And they weren't okay. Day, I was at work and I was working, and I remember after a period of time I had gone and just checked my phone. At this point, everyone kind of thought that she was doing better, so I was kind of trying to get back to work, make some money. I had taken a lot of time off. And when I checked my phone, I had probably 40-something missed calls and voicemails, and that was a very physical confirmation that it's about to really not be okay, and it's about to become very real very quickly for me. So I completely panicked, freaked out. My dad was telling me I needed to come to the hospital immediately and that it was very serious. And so I got to the hospital as quickly as I could. And when I got there, I will never forget the face, the look on my grandmother and on my dad. And as soon as I got there, we all went into a room with a doctor and a clergyman. And, the doctor pretty much told us that it's not good, and that it's time for us now to make a decision. It's time for us to make a decision. And the virus had completely ravished her, and she had become very septic and necrotic. And like my mother's skin was coal black. Her hands were like in that death grip. And for those of you who have seen the death claw or the death grip, you know what I'm talking about. Her skin had started to literally rot. And it wasn't only as deep as the epidermis, her entire stomach had also become septic and necrotic. And seeing my mother from underneath the tarp, who's still breathing, who's still attached to the physical world, but her flesh is rotting and is green and purple and black and discolored, and her hands clenched up, and her acrylics literally falling off of her, was something like I couldn't even imagine. That was my first time. that was really my first time seeing a body look like that. And I can still see it in my mind, and it's very haunting. I'm crying on YouTube, so this is cool. Anyway, so we had to make a decision. And so some of the other people in my family, my brothers, sisters, they came to the hospital. And we had 3 choices that we could ultimately make. Choose to try to operate on her and get her a new stomach, which the doctors said there was about a 90-something% chance that she would just die on the operating table. And there wasn't a guarantee they'd be able to get a stomach in time. And even if we did, it would be very costly, and there's no guarantee, and that it was much more likely that she would die during the operation. The other 2 choices were, the other one was that we could essentially just let nature run its course and just kind of let it happen, whatever happens. The doctors were pretty convinced that if we went down that route, she might make it a couple more days, if that. And then the third choice was to make her as comfortable as possible, but remove all life-sustaining assistance like oxygen. Keep her comfortable, but kind of let her go, and give her some medication to make her even more comfortable, and assist her in her transition. And like I said, I can remember the faces of my family and the faces of grief and sadness and anger and shock and denial. And it became very real for me at this point, and it became very not okay. But this was a huge lesson in my life to how quickly things can change. Ultimately, we all eventually unanimously decided to make her as comfortable as we could and to assist her in her transition and her ascension. And we went into the hospital room, and they immediately started giving her some medication to help her pass more comfortably. And another thing that very much haunts me was when they took the tube out of her esophagus, and there was this gut-wrenching gurgling noise, and her body convulsed a little bit, and I can see that in my mind, and I can see her discolored skin in my mind. And remember, my mother was in a coma during this, so she was kind of put under, but not completely. If you would walk into a room, she would raise her eyebrows at you. And I remember when we were all sitting around her after they had administered some medication and taken all the life-supporting equipment off of her to help her pass. Her eyes had opened. My mother had really beautiful, gorgeous blue eyes, but they had kind of become a little bit discolored. And I remember myself and my family, we were all around her hospital bed, and we were telling her that it was okay and that we loved her and that she could go. And I remember the energy in that room felt like nothing I've ever felt before in my entire life. I mean, it really felt like we were in a totally different dimension. It was hard to believe that time was even moving. And I remember I remember tears actually coming out from her eyes and rolling across her cheek. And I got really scared and uncomfortable for a second, because I was realizing that she was experiencing a version of this. And I don't know exactly to what extent, but my mother fought extremely hard to stay. which made the whole thing that much harder. She was only at about 15-20% oxygen intake, and she fought for a good 12 and a half hours off of all the life support because she did not want to leave. Even the doctors were shocked as to how long she tried to stay. And I can't help but think that, knowing my mother, she wanted to be here in the physical to see, you know, my youngest brother graduate high school and my other brother kind of get himself together and my sisters and I get married and all the things that parents would want to see. And so anyway, she passed at 3:24 in the afternoon today, about 5 years ago. And the whole experience, those 3 weeks in the hospital, I can go back to them immediately. And I can relive certain parts of them and her celebration of life and everything that entailed and what that taught me as a 22-year-old woman is priceless, and was so many valuable spiritual lessons were given to me. And, you know, I have such a powerful ancestral guardian on the other side of the veil. My mother was fierce. She was kind. She was my best friend. She was my harshest critic. She fundamentally shaped me into who I am now. And her death has also sculpted and shaped me into who I am now. My mother was an incredible prophetess, and her words could inspire or cut you down. She did a lot of work talking and motivating and sharing her stories of trauma and helping heal and guide other people through horrible, gut-wrenching experiences. And she worked a lot with addicts, and she worked a lot with recovery and redemption. And I try my best to fill these very big shoes. And sometimes I don't always feel like I am cut out for filling those shoes. And sometimes I wish I hadn't been pushed so abruptly, so young, into becoming this matriarch of my family and filling in my mother's footsteps. But there are some things in life that are out of our control. I'm a big believer in free will and manifesting your own destiny. But there's also times where destiny happens and fate intervenes, and it's not up to us. And this was not up to me. And it has become the biggest blessing in my life. And it has become one of the most painful wounds and heaviest burdens of my life as well. I hope that I will be even half the prophetess that my mother was and is. And, you know, I try to bring her glory and honor every day, and she's always with me. And yeah, so that is my story of losing my mother and how it's affected me. And hopefully some of this has been beneficial. I feel like it's beneficial for me to talk about, and it's a strange experience talking about this to a camera. And I'm not really entirely sure what else to say about it. I mean, I didn't really plan much for this video. It's just kind of off the cuff. But I was motivated to talk about death and grief because today is her veil crossing anniversary. So I hope all of you have a beautiful day, And until next time, blessed be.